Welcome everyone. Good morning on this Wednesday morning for this very exciting session brought to you on behalf of the European Health Forum Gastein, organized by the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs, EUCOPE, in partnership with Sanofi. Thank you very much for being here. I've been looking tremendously forward to the next 1.5 hours, where I've had the pleasure of inviting you here, all of you, to join 2 panels, very expertise-heavy panels that will take us through insights and forward-looking ways of improving the lives for patients, or people living with rare diseases. The session here is actually called A Better Tomorrow for Rare Disease Care and Research in Europe, with the subtitle Rethinking Investments and Access in the Light of the OMP Regulation Review. I will be your moderator today. My name is Christian Järvelund. I'm a partner with European consultancy Copenhagen Economics. Myself, I have a passion for bringing people together in partnerships and make them succeed. So it's a big pleasure for me to be here today. During the past years, I myself have been deeply involved with the OMP regulation, advising patient organization, companies, industry organizations, and the European Commission in that area. Today, we'll hear from 2 panels. And in 1.5 hours, I really truly hope and expect that we have all gotten much wiser on what it takes and much more motivated to make a difference for people living with rare diseases. It's no coincidence that this session pops up here today at a conference like Gastein today. It's actually a perfect timing. You see, what we're talking about is our patients' lives, and there's really something at stake. Now, rare diseases, they are rare. It lies in the definition. At the same time, we know that collectively, a lot of people are actually living with rare diseases. Latest estimates suggest up to 30 million Europeans living with a rare disease. So despite being individually rare, they are collectively hampering and suffering and impacting a lot of our friends and families' lives across the European Union. You ever thought about the word orphan that is often used in terms of rare disease, sometimes called orphan diseases? It's really that was no one initially to kind of take responsibility, to somehow pay attention, take ownership. Thus the word orphan diseases. But that all changed around 20 years ago, when the European Commission put in place a special type of regulation, acknowledging that there was no companies paying particular interest, no one really to take ownership and seeing an opportunity to develop new therapies for these people living with a rare disease. The regulation put in place 2000 had a number of different incentives or motivators for companies. Primarily one saying, we know that it's a very small patient group in the end, so you develop a product that is very costly, and in the end, only few patients will be using it. That's difficult to reconcile high costs with a potential low group of people who want to use it. So what we'll do is we'll put in place special protection so that you know that you will have at least the access to those patients more to yourself for a longer period of time that you were used to. Will that help you and motivate you? And it actually turned out that it did. Since 2000, where literally we had very few, like I would say 0, let's just go with around 0 products for people living with rare diseases. Today, we're up to around 200 products, 200 medicines for patients living with rare diseases. So it truly has helped. Now, why am I saying all this now? That's because we're taking stock now. The European Commission and the whole European Union is these days evaluating, looking back at the regulation. What was a success and where have we become wiser throughout the past 20 years. Because right now is where we are evaluating and putting in place adjustments and changes for a new regulation that will probably stay in place for the next 20, 30 years, impacting patients over the next 20, 30 years, and mind you, impacting those of our friends and family that are not even born today. So this could not be a better time for thinking about what have we learned that worked. That's actually the topic of the first panel. And then the second panel, what do we want to do and what do we need to do going forward to continue to provide care and treatments for our friends and family living with a rare disease. So that's the topic today, and I hope that got you motivated. I'm at least extremely motivated to this. And this brings me to, before I introduce the panel, just a few things. This is this is a two-way conference. You're welcome to listen and absorb, but you're also welcome to respond with questions. You can use the Q&A function, bring up questions, and I'll bring them to the panelists. You can always reflect and comment, maybe not a question. You can go to the chat function and comment and reflect, and just remember to use to all panelists and attendees when you use the chat function. Now, if you will be so kind, my Gastein colleagues, to bring up our first three panelists, where we will take a look back at the past 20 years. What have we learned? What really matters to us? I have three panelists with me here today. Kaja Kantorska, welcome. She's a policy officer at the Pharmaceutical DG for Health and Food Safety, also known as DG Sante, in the European Commission. So it doesn't get more close to the one who's looking at the revisions and wanting to find out what worked and what we need to take forward. I also have with me, we also have with us Manuela Buxo. Manuela, you are head of European region in Sanofi Genzyme, and you're one of those companies who are making these products and have a deep insight in what it will take to make even more products for rare disease people. And finally, we have with us Jan Lecam. He is the top dog CEO of EURORDIS, European Patient Organization. So he knows everything about what it means to live with rare disease, because he actually represents many rare disease patients. Welcome to all of you today. Let me try and kick off our look back. If I start addressing you, Manuela, what do you think when you're looking back for the past 20 years? What have been the reason behind this success, going from 0 to almost 200 products of the, what has been the reason behind this success, and how do you see these successes play out? What have been the consequences from where you're sitting?
Thank you very much, Christian. I'm very happy to be here and to be part of this panel. We completely agree with you from a Sanofi Genzyme perspective that the OMP regulation has really been a tremendous success. We went actually from 8 treatments that were approved before the OMP regulation was adopted to now 200, as you said. So it's really changed the lives of many patients in Europe. We as a company, we've been committed to rare diseases for more than 40 years. We really don't want to leave any patient behind, but we also know that there are many patients out there who are still waiting for treatment options. As a company, we've launched many products in this space where there were no treatment options available, like Gaucher, Fabry, Pompe, MPS1, etc. And now our research and development efforts include more than 30 assets, future assets, hopefully, to treat rare disease conditions that are currently not having any options available. So really exciting, and that was possible because of the OMP regulation. I believe one key element of the regulation is the market exclusivity, because that is a key element for companies to have an economic rationale to invest in rare disease development, because you have to think about these are very small patient populations. You're talking about long development cycles, a lot of uncertainty because there's limited understanding of a lot of those disease areas, very hard to recruit, and therefore also because there are fewer patients out there, there's less incentive than from a revenue perspective to truly invest in a highly risky area where there's also a risk of failure. So the exclusivity period really provides a strong incentive for companies to say, I want to invest in that space, and I will get a return when I am successful, if I am successful. So that incentive framework, including the 10-year exclusivity plus the 2 years for products with a pediatric plan and some of the waivers, it is really a really strong framework that we believe in. And if you add that to the incentives that have been created by the US and by Japan, you have a much more compelling case for global orphan medicine research and development. So I really believe for Europe, the OMP regulation created a positive environment for companies to boost investment in research and development, not just us. Several companies are investing in that space to really make sure that we address the existing unmet needs and contribute also, on the other hand, to the competitiveness of Europe in the context of the overall global industry.
Thank you, Manuela. So you as a company have really, developed and brought to patients many more products than you would have had, let's say, if that regulation had not been in place.
Correct, absolutely. And you can also see from a pipeline perspective, right, that we are continuing to invest and will continue to invest in rare diseases in the future, so that commitment is a sustainable commitment thanks to the OMP regulation, for sure. Yeah.
Now, I'm really curious to hear from the patient perspective, because of course, this must have been a game changer in the past 20 years. How have you seen the developments and the learnings? What do you take away with you, Jan? Could you describe a little bit the changes it has brought to patients?
When we developed this regulation more than 20 years ago, we were really inspired by the US, and we were full of hopes, but we didn't know how much the hopes will deliver or not. And now what we've seen is that this regulation is a success. It's one of the regulations that the European Union can be proud of playing the critical mass of the continent to have such regulation to attract investment. So it has worked. Investment is there, products are being designated, almost 2,500, and as you mentioned, 200 products approved. So that's a huge difference. And how does that translate for patients is that among these 200 medicines, a lot of them are saving lives, as simple as that. Saving lives, transforming lives, improving lives. Isn't that what we want to do, to bring what the advancement of science can do to improve the lives of our people? The second thing I think we need to take are the success stories, because some of these success stories have been criticized along the way when they happened. But in fact, they have been the success stories which have attracted more investment in that area. For instance, the different enzyme replacement therapies, which are now generics. The Gleevec, which was criticized for having several rare indications. But this was a turn to attract the big pharma into this area rather than only small and medium-sized enterprise. And today, all the big pharmas are invested in that area, and Gleevec is a generic product. Also, we now see the new generation of gene therapies and cell therapies, which not only are transformative, but have the potential to be fully curative, particularly when they are given to newborns before the appearance of the first symptoms. That's a major change. So when we think of a regulation for the next 20 or 30 years, we should really have that in mind. What kind of regulation can really adapt to the advancement of science? And that's the next thing, is that what we found in these last 20 years is that science has been there much more than we could have hoped at that time. And that's fantastic. And there is now a new element, which is technology. all the digital transformation is a huge accelerator in many respects for the development, but also in the part of post-marketing. And the last thing is that the policy framework in Europe has been conducive, and we should not look at the regulation of orphan drugs as a standalone. And that was clear from the beginning, but it took us certain time to get there. And it's important to have coordination of research, to have investment in research. It's important to bring the partnership between academia, industry, clinicians, patients, all stakeholders. It's important to have downstream the organization of the healthcare system to conduct the clinical trials and also to collect the data after marketing. And I think that's one of the main outcomes that is more difficult to grasp on, is that one of the huge benefit of this regulation is that it has really elevated the playing field of this area in terms of quality of research. There is much more academic research, much more clinical research, and even the failures of clinical trials. This is enhancing the quality of research in the hospital, in the clinical teams, in the academia, and all of all the stakeholders. So there is more knowledge, there is more competences, more skills to develop the therapies of tomorrow. And we should not forget also that this regulation has helped to create a lot of startups. If I take only in France, 50% of the biotechs in human products have a product which is orphan designated. That's very significant. That means investment, that means jobs, that means creation of values, that means taxes. And if Europe was smarter, it will also mean an improvement of our trade balance, but we're not there yet. I will come back to that. And multi-stakeholder collaboration has been a key success factor all along. And we should, whatever we do with this new regulation, we should make sure that it is enhancing the collaboration between the public assessors and decision makers and all the private actors for the benefit of society.
Thank you very much, Jan. This is very interesting. You touch upon a number of different things that we will come back to. Now, looking forward to hearing from you, Kaya. Well, it seems that you have a lot of stuff to be proud of here. What have you been taking with you when looking back, and how do you discuss that in Santen, saying what have we learned and what do we want to keep for moving forward?
Thank you, Christian, and good morning, everyone. And I'm very happy to be here. I think it's really the moment to discuss, to a bit stop and look back, like we did last year. What have we learned these past 20 years about the experience in the EU with the orphan regulation and all that my previous speakers and colleagues have said. I can only, agree, and I think we can really be proud of this piece of legislation, which from my side, I can only say that looking at what we have learned from this evaluation is this, unmet need that was there before, and this very involvement of academia, of SMEs, of big pharma, and as well involvement of patients, first of all, because this regulation created somehow this environment and this the special committee of experts in the medicines agency where patients were there and their voice was heard, and they could as well help and influence this work. I think it is very important, and we have seen how as well this committee and how we all have been more and more thankfully busy with many designations coming, so many products under development. Of course, we have almost 200 products authorized, but there are a lot still under development, and this is as well thanks to the regulation. Market exclusivity, the main market incentive, the cornerstone of the regulation, has been mentioned here. But of course, there are as well other incentives and help and support that is given through the regulation at the early stages of development, scientific advice, which is given to applicants, because we see that not only the big experienced companies are coming, but also the small ones, and they receive this help, they do how to, conduct the different trials and studies. So this we learned from the evaluation that this is very, very important for them. Jan mentioned this ecosystem for research, which of course we have research at national level and this notion of designation of this tag, orphan tag on those developments gave them, let's say, opened the door to ask for help in research at national level, but also at EU level. There were some projects ongoing for rare diseases, and these designated orphan products were directly, granted research help in research from the EU. So it all builds this big ecosystem for together with other activities. But in this, now taking stock of what has happened, we see that indeed this challenge of unmet need, it was there. And of course, it would be a lie to say that we all hoped, probably we hoped to address this unmet needs, but of course it is very difficult, to feel it completely. And now after 20 years, we still see that 95% of rare diseases do not have treatment options. And this is something, to take this step back and look into, ways now, what we can do to try, with this regulation, as this is the moment to look at possible solutions of what we can do to help improve and foster development in these unmet needs. Because although, it is with our ecosystem in the EU, with our rules on orphans, it is, I would say, quite, we have some rules for companies, for developers that they have to show that their product is always better than other product, and it is not easy. So their bar is really high. But on the other hand, we see that 70% of orphans on the market are in areas where there are other treatment options, which of course for patients is good because they have choice. But still, we maintain in this high unmet need. So we need to still now look for ways how to boost those developments. We have as well new challenges, which Jan already started mentioning. Science is evolving. 20 years ago, there were different kind of products, and now we look at really these novel, innovative products. And we need to make sure as well that the regulation, is flexible enough to allow for these products, and we look into ways now in this revision of how to do that, and that is really very important because we need innovation in the EU. And the last, but actually I would say the biggest challenge that we have as well, that we have seen growing through the years, is the fact that this innovation means nothing if it doesn't reach patients. So, this we have seen that although, with the regulation, those medicines reached, faster the patients than before the regulation, and to more member states, this is still a very, very big problem. And this unequal access is something we will need to tackle now in the revision. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. I think that is good overview, and you're saying, but despite the success, you also point to some things, because it seems like we're all happy, and then you throw this bomb at us, saying that 95% of the rare diseases that we know about do not even have an authorized treatment at this moment, and you continue adding other perspectives to where we're actually seeing gaps. So it seems in many ways we have a good starting point, but there are still many things that we need then to use this past 20 years experience to really leverage. Jan, is that how you see that as well? Or how do you see that from the patient perspective? Are things just dandy fine, or how do you see it?
It's always a difficult number to manipulate, honestly, because depends if you're talking about diseases or you're talking about number of people affected, right? So and although we see that the approved orphan drugs have been developed both for diseases which are in the high range of the prevalence or in the extreme rare diseases, so you have a mix clearly. So the regulation works for all type of rare diseases, but most of the treatments that have been developed have an impact on a large number of patients. So it's true that there is products approved with an indication in rare diseases only for 5% of the rare diseases. So that's clearly a huge unmet need. But on the other hand, we can be a bit more positive by recognizing that some of these treatments are affecting large numbers of people across Europe. Also, some of these technologies can after be reused for other therapeutic indication, other rare diseases. So there is the scientific platforms have an agility which enables that kind of development. Now, on the huge unmet needs, if we speak about challenges, what we need to do to attract it's obviously less risk for a company to invest in an area where there is already an ecosystem in place, where there is the clinical centers identified, when the endpoints are validated, when there is a natural history well done, etc. So we need to de-risk that investment, and that goes with the dialogue upstream. We need to make it the standards to have that dialogue upstream and to be much more companion of the development of the product. The EMA and the HTA now coordinated European level should be companion of success, not gatekeepers. That's what needs to change still much more. And we can also create new incentives or modulate the current incentives so that it attracts investment in areas of unmet needs. Now, the second challenge we have really is that our decision-making process today for the assessment of medicines and the price and reimbursement decision in our area of rare diseases is simply doesn't fit for purpose. And that's not a criticism of the colleagues doing that assessment or those negotiations. It's just that they are working within the current framework, and that current framework doesn't fit the purpose of the new science. And the new science means that we're bringing medicines to market good enough in terms of quality, safety, efficacy, but with a high level of uncertainties and with limited knowledge. So to address this issue of not fit for purpose, we need to recognize that the evidence generation is all along the product life cycle, and that there is no more magic about the marketing authorization, that it's before and after marketing authorization. So we need this alignment of evidentiary requirements with an early dialogue with EMA, HTA, payers and the companies, with clinicians and patients, but also all along, and particularly after market authorization. We also need to take the scale of Europe to generate the evidence needed. So not to have this fragmented approach country by countries, but to have this post-marketing evidence generation coordinated at European level. And we have for that today the European Health, the European Reference Networks, we have the European Health Digital Space. So we have tools and we should use these tools. And maybe we should use the EU funds also to co-fund this generation of evidence, as considering that this is still research after marketing authorization. What's important is to operationalize the system now in the next 10 years, so to collect the data on quality, on scale at European level and on time, in order to do the reassessment and to reevaluate what we pay in the value for money of these treatments, but also to improve simply the prescriptions, the quality of care of patients. What has been unacceptable in the last 20 years is that sometime after 10 or 15 years, we still don't know what exactly we're doing with that product for some of the patients, because we have not collected the data that were needed. And why we didn't do it? Because each country had different requirements. That's nonsense. That's just waste of public money and private money. So we need to accept that there is a life cycle, that there is a continuum of evidence generation, and there should be a continuum of assessment and decisions. The third challenge is the patient access. Along these 20 years, 30% of the patients in Europe didn't have access to these approved medicines. That's what our different surveys over years have shown, and other sources also. So there is huge inequalities. That's not acceptable. It's not respecting our legislations in terms of transparency, and it's certainly not respecting our ethics and not our goals in the Sustainable Development Goals and in the universal health coverage. So we're missing the point. But there is worse than that, is that if we look ahead at the next years, already today, I would say, but even more if we look ahead, we are set for failure. Really, I insist, Your audit is telling you we're set for failure. All these gene therapies and cell therapies will not get to the patients. And don't think that by magic it will happen. There is plenty of example in the industry, in different areas of industry, where there has been industrial failure because the environment was not ready for it, was not prepared. So we really need to adjust our system so that we don't get into this industrial failure, that science can really transform into therapies which are improving the life of people with good health outcomes, good social outcomes, with social integration of people, and that we are not set for societal failure altogether. The worst, I can tell you, the worst for us is the decline of hopes and the rise of despair. We have discussions in our groups now that maybe we should have a branch like ACT UP now to act and to get what we need. It's like a political movement. There is a moment you want to take the arms to fight for your life. Be careful that we don't get there. It's already happening when you see people raising funds to pay for gene therapy in many countries. That's just the beginning. But we're hearing much worse than that. People are going to escape the system if we don't provide a system that addresses the societal needs. So that's really my plea. And my last thing, which has nothing to do but as much important, is that we should always think international competitiveness. EU today has accepted to be a second wagon to the US. That's what we are. So yes, the regulation was successful with these 200 products, but look at the reality. It's often, in more than 50% of the cases, it's a science based in Europe, but then developed in the US and coming back only for commercial negotiation. That's a position of the weak. So I hope that we've learned the hard lessons of COVID to say, we want to bring back the research and development, the jobs, and the negotiations here, so to improve the trade balance of Europe with exportation. We want to be leaders as the US and as China, not the second or third wagon after US and China, if we think 20 years from now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. I think both you and Kai are touching upon some very core issues that might have less to do with the original prescription for success of the regulation, being that special protection period called market exclusivity, but rather that we're seeing a surge in new technologies, these cell and gene therapies that you're saying, Jan, could work, wonders, because many of these rare diseases have a genetic diseases, and that cell and gene therapies could really be working here. And then at the same time, I hear both you and Kai are saying something about getting these new technologies approved and gotten to patients, and there's something around both the authorization part, but also further downstream with payers, and finally getting them to patients. Even let's say in the situation where the technology is there or could be kind of worked with, that to me sounds fascinating. Manuela, may I ask you, from your perspective, can you maybe develop a bit on what Jan and Kai here is saying about, let's say technologies are there, cutting edge technologies, but is it true that you're seeing certain barriers for getting them further through the path down to patients?
Yeah, so I think Jan touched on many different points, and Kaya as well, that are really relevant here and important to understand. I do agree with Jan that Europe is not as competitive and certainly not as well prepared as I would think, in especially when it comes to rare diseases and competitiveness when it comes to research. So a couple of things. I think the access topic is a really important one in Europe. We are certainly concerned about the ever increasing evidence package requirements, for orphan medicines in Europe. Like also seeing higher requirements for comparisons with existing products when that comparison is sometimes not feasible. There's certainly also a concern around the lower willingness to pay compared to other parts of the world, right? I mean, that is the big difference versus the US. And I think that ultimately will lead to a situation where European patients do not get access to innovative treatments. We've just seen it with Bluebird, right? That was one of the most recent examples.
What is that, Manuela? What is Bluebird?
Bluebird is a company that has just decided to pull out of Europe. So they basically said that they will be focusing on the US market, driven by the challenges of achieving appropriate value recognition and market access for Zynteglo in Europe. And that's a gene therapy, basically. So one of the examples that Jan was just mentioning, because they just couldn't find a way to get payers to fund it in what they would consider an appropriate way, right? So I think it is one of those examples of trying to bring new innovation to the European market and not having the right environment yet in order to achieve that. Yeah, so I do think we need to look at that. But coming back to some of the things that we discussed earlier around the OMP regulation, absolutely there are things we can improve. There's always things we can improve, but I also agree with Jan that the rare disease innovation that is already on the market is an opportunity for us to celebrate. There's going to be more coming in the future, and I would just caution that we apply stricter conditions to obtain OMP regulatory approval. For example, looking at a stricter prevalence threshold, focusing too much on ultra rare conditions to get to a broader group of patients, because it really may impact not just the research and development efforts in this space, because the more we limit it, the more it becomes harder to compete in that space. Yeah? And it also may impact all of those patients that are in what I would call larger rare disease areas. And I think that's a hard call for us to make, to say, we're going to be limiting and restricting that part of it. Yeah. And always remembering that when we invest in rare diseases, you're talking about very high R&D costs per patients because of the small populations, because there's a real lack in disease knowledge. As I said earlier, it's harder to recruit patients. The development times are usually longer because we need to learn so much about the disease itself. And then there's a really greater risk of failure because there's so much that we don't know. But we also have to look at the same time, at the requirements we hold up for evidence generation, as I said earlier, and look at new ways of evidence and whether it's using observational data or real-world evidence data. And the data harmonization piece that Jan mentioned earlier is a really important point. Because of the small patient populations per country, we have no choice in Europe to work across countries to really harmonize data collection across the region to have a much better impact on patients, but also on the evidence generation piece. So there's a lot to be done, but there's several elements where we really have to make a difference to make a stronger impact for patients.
Thank you, Manuela. Let me try and conclude to this your first session, where I think you've done, all three of you, a fantastic job, very clearly articulating some of the learnings from the past, but you also were quite focused and agreeing that we still have, we could build on that success, but we need to do that. I think Jan expressed it most passionate in terms of the closeness to patients, which of course his heart, together with all of you, but representing patients. We are seeing despair. I hear a market exclusivity that really has been a well-functioning, in addition to a number of other supporting incentives that really has sparked that interest. Mind you, in alignment with the rest of the world. I've heard that several times, and of course it reminds us that we are not an island in this region. And then at the same time, I hear advancement and the ways to bring forward technologies that are actually, we have them, we are working with them, we are developing them, but I hear some concerns with all of you that we are not able to bring forward these new technologies through authorization processes. How do we balance safety and efficacy with, let's say, inherent challenges of new technologies, uncertainties, small patient populations? And finally, what role do payers and physicians play at the end? And there, of course, we move away from the European Union perspective, if you will, and into the member state perspective, but in the end, we're all part of the European Union, so there might be some way to bridge that. I'd like to take this time to thank all three of you for participating here in the first panel and trying to focus and teach us what has worked, the market exclusivity, where do we still need to make progress to really not get behind and end with patients in despair. Let's really try to work further with getting the technologies, out there to patients, through EMA, through payers. I heard one thing I want to take further in the next panel, Jan, that was we work like companions. That speaks to me. Let's see what the next panel will be trying to look at types of solutions will say to that. Thank you for all three of you so far. And we're now ready to present a wonderful next panel to you, who have listened in on the first panel here, are now ready to take it further into how do we work with these types of solutions. I also have some questions from you out there, and I think some of them are truly getting into the solutions part, like how do we bridge the gap and the dilemma between companies needing to get into products where they can see a return to cover their cost, at the same time are member states willing to pay? Certainly an interesting dilemma that I'm sure we'll hear about. For this session, I have the great honor of inviting Michela Gabaldo. You are head of translational projects, management and regulatory affairs at Fondazione Teleton. So you do research, you raise funds for research into rare diseases. We also have with us Alexander Natz. Welcome to you, Alexander. And you are the Secretary General, so the CEO, if you will, of the European Confederation of Pharmaceutical Entrepreneurs, EUCOPE. And finally, welcome to you, Cesar Hernandez Garcia. You're head of the Department of Medicines for Human Use at the Spanish Medicines Agency. So again, a panel that is extremely competent in trying to see how do we actually work with these things in practice and potentially address the concerns and needs that we have just seen raised and concluded in the first panel. So maybe I want to start with you, Cesar, as part of the being a part of the Spanish Medicines Agency, working in there. You've heard now some of these concerns around, are we able to bring the technology that is there, but do we have a system of flexibility, companionship, and so forth, where we solve issues with new technologies and new disease areas? No wonder there will be some challenges in getting them to patients. How do you see that? Are those things also part of your priority concerns moving forward? And do you see ways of addressing these things? I would be very curious to hear your perspective on that, Cesar.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity. I think that we have been working in silos for quite a long time, and we have tried to solve the problems of the different silos. And to be honest, in the end, I think it doesn't work. We need to take the process from the very beginning to the end and to solve the process all along the cycle, from development, clinical research, for sure authorization, but also including access. Because if we don't solve all the problems from this perspective, I think we are going to find a very high wall in the end of the road. And I think that we are moving a little bit, probably slower than expected for many people, but we are moving in that direction. So there has been many initiatives during this last years in order to, for example, Jan commented this previously, to provide advice to the developers so they can start the development of the product, thinking on not only what they would need to get the marketing authorization, but also what they would need to provide the access for the countries to have the real access. I hope sincerely that the new HTA regulation can be also an important piece of this puzzle, and that we can get closer regulators. I mean, all the stakeholders, to be honest, not only regulators and HTA, but also patients and healthcare professionals and the industry and the academia that is in the beginning of many of these projects. So I think that there are many pieces of the work already there from the very beginning, trying to provide advice to the academia, so their developments can be uptaken by the companies, and they do not lose time in order to get that data that are probably in the very beginning in the hands of the academia, but that in the end can also be useful to get the approval and to get the access to the product in a given country. So I think that what we need to do, and this is what would be my main priority for moving forward, is to break down silos and to work together in order to provide the framework that makes possible that the products are developed, but in the end get the patients without creating a problem.
Thank you, Cesar. I think that follows. That's a very concrete and focused priority. We'll hear through today and the discussion in this panel. Of course, I'm curious to hear other perspectives on how do we break down these silos. I think you gave a little bit of indication and said a little bit about how you were working in your agency, trying to advise and so forth. Maybe that's something that we can touch a bit upon later today as well. But let me go to you, Michaela. Welcome to this year's session. You've listened in on the first panel as well, and in your position, what are your main concerns and priorities for moving forward, and do you see ways of making it happen?
So thanks a lot, Christian. Good morning to everybody, and I'm very happy and honored to be here today. I heard all the first panel, but also my previous colleague, and from my point of view, I can only confirm that my main concern for the future is the access. So the elephant in the room here is the access, and it is true for all the orphan drugs, but is even more critical and challenging for orphan ATMP. And the example that Manuela had bring on the Bluebird Bio case is what may happen and is already happening, because we were aware 10 years ago that transformative therapies and potentially curative therapies would have reached the market, but we had not been able to prepare the right environment to reach really the patient. And what we are experiencing is dramatic difficulties in giving access to potentially curative treatment that are not available everywhere, because they may be targeting only a limited, very small population, and there could be also limited knowledge spread across Europe. However, we have already tools available in Europe to manage patient and move patient cross-border to give access to these transformative therapies. So my main concern is that either we come out from what Cesar was saying, so come out from the way of thinking and come collectively all together. Altogether, I mean private and public sector, payers and developers, all together since the beginning to tackle all the different roadblocks leading to not only the registration that was the issue 20 years ago. Now we know how to reach the registration with all the challenges, but we know how to reach. Now we don't know how to give these same therapies that we have developed in our institutes to the patient, because then after the registration, we have the valley of death. The risk is to have the valley of death of the jeopardized and fragmented market access. And this is really unacceptable and unsustainable when you are going to innovative, transformative therapies, but especially targeting very, very limited population. So in a snapshot, I think that the words that I've heard today is multi-stakeholder collaboration. To me, is mandatory. We need to, why not piloting a project at the European level, starting from specific cases, and work all together to tackle and to identify and tackle all the roadblock. A lot of groups, Organised was leading an initiative, for example, have been EUCOPE as well, have identified the roadblock. Now we need to find solution. We have some of them that may be available. Joint HT assessment could be one, is one of the elements. It's for sure one of the key elements, but is a starting point. Then we need to put in place a continuum, of course, of evidence generation that link the evidence generated during the development and the evidence that is needed after the registration, the post-marketing one, so that we can balance the uncertainty that these transformative therapies are bringing. You know, we need for sure to come out from the traditional approach, because these drugs are very, very transformative and they're completely different as traditional one. And if we still continue applying the current way of working, that we came to an unsuccess. Also, in this pilot project, we could also think about, for example, why not thinking about European funds to finance this product, and then leverage on the infrastructure that are already available, like the EARN, you know, to clarify and define a clear path to give access cross-border, for example, where needed. So I think that there are a lot of elements that can be taken to the table. We for sure have a first-hand experience with all the trouble in accessing stream values, for example, but now we are facing exactly the same trouble for all the other therapies that we are developing at our institute, and that has been registered through a partnership with industry. So I think that we have a common goal: reach the patient, and this is a moral imperative for everybody.
Thank you, Michaela. And you touch upon a lot of things that you're building on the things that we've talked about, but you come to some very good examples. I hear you saying about this life cycle evidence generation, or this means instead of just thinking about generating evidence up to the point of getting a medicine authorized, yes, it's safe, yes, it's effective, you're thinking about using, especially maybe because it's small patient groups, trying to use all the information that we get after it's starting to also be used to learn more and more over time, and use that evidence in the way that we think about also maybe payment and the value of the medicine, and not stopping at the authorization.
We need to change the paradigm also in the development phase. So as Jan was alluding before, we need to, first of all, corroborate how we collect evidence generation also during the development, thinking about not only the registration target, but thinking about the market access. And at the time of the market access, what we have to balance or provide evidence, of course, is the uncertainty, you know, on the durability of these therapies that the majority of them have a single administration that are potentially be efficacious for the long life. So of course, these are is very early age, sorry, and so it is you know, we need to cope with what we have. However, there are very, very promising result, and we need to give the possibility to the patient to have access to this. So we need to find a way to collect data, more data in the early phase, and then link to the post-approval, so that they could be used also for you know, manage the risk and share the risk with by putting in place a risk-sharing agreement, payment by annuities, payment by performance, you know, all the different, I'm not you know, an expert on this, but of course there are many tools available that could be explored. And if you are able to work together in a pilot project, you could, you know, check whether what could be done and could be advanced in the early phase development, and what could be useful for later on when the product is on the market.
Thank you, Michaela. Now that, of course, that makes me extremely curious to hear about your perspective on this, Alexander, being representing and knowing really what's going on in many of these companies that are actually developing these medicines, because you represent both small and medium and some of the largest global companies that have strong experiences in developing medicines for rare diseases. When you hear this, what Cesar is saying, what Michaela is saying, Silos on the first panel, what is that? How does that resonate with you? What do you hear companies are saying?
Thanks, Christian. It's really a pleasure to be here to talk about this topic, and it's the right point in time. Let me first really start with mentioning that indeed, I mean, many of those companies which we represent haven't been existing actually when the orphan legislation has been drafted more than 20 years ago. So I think it has been a commercial success also from the company perspective, but it's not so much about the commercial success. It's more about these almost 200 products which we're having. I think we need to make sure that we are carrying this process on when we're looking into the future. And I think to take, and this is what I think Manuela and Jan have alluded to really take the international perspective, to really define that objective of an international competitiveness is really critical. And I think that's it cannot repeat it often enough. We're living in a global world, and also the crisis and the vaccine access to vaccines have shown that it is really critical to make sure that we have R&D in Europe. This is maybe a starting point here from the industry perspective, but I think the good news when we talk incentives is that we have a common goal. The common goal is certainly about access to patients, certainly something we can get better at. There's no doubt about it. We have to discuss that. And the other goal is certainly to discuss and tackle it, or to tackle the 95% of the rare diseases where we don't have a treatment option. We are fully aware of the fact that we have to talk a little bit about the incentive system, and that we need to talk a little bit of a modulation here and there. But I hope that the main architecture and structure which is existing today, which as we have heard, has been a success, that we don't tackle and turn it on its head, and that we don't put the structure at risk, because the infrastructure, or the architecture, better to say, of the orphan legislation and the incentives have been very successful. Now, I think Europe, in a way, and to say also something positive, we've been good at having a good, robust agency with EMA. We see some of those companies which have been mentioned, Bluebird Bio, coming first to Europe, because the disease they have been addressing, beta thalassemia, is very there's a big prevalence in the Mediterranean. I mean, that's good news. We have a robust agency which brought this product to the market. But where we see challenges is definitely around the access. So I completely agree, and that's one of the main points I wanted to make. We have to discuss access. Good news is that we will have a joint clinical assessment about those products. We are talking about one product, so we will have one HTA starting with oncology and ATMPs probably in early 2025. This is something which is critical that we get it right for orphan medicines. I mean, it tends to be forgotten that this methodology for this one-stop shop in the HTA is critical for orphans and ATMPs, that the particularities of those medicines are taken into consideration. No, but looking ahead is really about how can we better cooperate, and at the EU level, coordinate potentially better around access issues. And the ERNs have been mentioned, and the ERNs have been a real success story. So far, in a nutshell, it was about clustering knowledge, having centers where there is knowledge, irrespectively whether it's in Italy, Germany, France, Spain, or in other smaller countries. I think that's exactly the right approach. We shouldn't always look at those difficulties around access to say there's nothing we can do about it because it's a national competency. The European institutions have shown with the ERNs that we can do a lot with coordinating. And I think here it's really important that the Commission, in our that we all together, better to say, maybe under the leadership of the Commission, would bring together key stakeholders like patients, industry, and also payers, last but not least, very critical, to talk about those experiences which they have made. And we've talked a lot about real-world evidence. Why do we stop at the time of marketing authorization to take evidence generation into consideration when it comes to value? I'm not talking quality, safety, and efficacy, We all know there are post-authorization safety and efficacy studies since more than 10 years. That's happening. But from the industry perspective, we would need an integrated approach, a harmonized approach, because we can't set up one PASS study, one PAS study for the regulators, and then 15 different real-world evidence studies for the different HTA systems in the countries. We're harmonizing HTA, so we should also collaborate better on real-world evidence generation. When I talk about real-world evidence generation, it's really something where we need to have a clear methodology, where we need to take into consideration the demand of the payers, where we need to carefully listen to the payers. Where are the issues? Where do they see data gaps? How can we fill those data gaps? I think it's important from the industry perspective to carefully listen and to take those demands into consideration. So it's not like industry putting something on the table and the payers are looking at it. It's more the other way around, listening to payers first. Where are data gaps? How can we close those data gaps? Because only then we can somewhat increase the willingness to pay of payers if we help them to close those data gaps. So coordination around real-world evidence is one thing which I think we can discuss. The other thing which I think we can discuss, Michaela mentioned it, it's not just the European reference networks, it's more like the cross-border elements, which seem not to be working. I mean, there seems to be a lot of insecurity about decision-making processes and handing over budget control decisions to other institutions. So I think there is something we should also talk about. But one other thing, I think Michaela mentioned it as well, the third point, which I think we can collaborate much better, is about outcome-based agreements. And what are the lessons learned in the respective countries? We're talking about the same products here. And I think it's a great opportunity that we better use and better coordinate those vehicles, which are popping up at the member state level. I mean, we're not stopping that. I mean, Germany is starting with real-world evidence generation obligations on companies. I mean, it's an obligation. There's no way around it. And the same holds true for the ATMPs. And Jan has mentioned challenges indeed. I think what we've seen in the cell and gene therapies, which have been launched recently, they have been launched, most of them at least, under an outcome-based agreement, which I think it's worth to be discussed how we can better roll this out. So I think those are some of the elements which I'd like to see discussed, which are, in my opinion, potential solutions for the future to get better access to those medicines. But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we are living in an international environment, and the case has been mentioned of a company leaving Europe, which was a company pro-European, if I may say that, by coming first to Europe, but they are leaving and turning around back to the US. So that's a bit of a difficult situation. We should bear that in mind, that we are not working in territorial silos as well here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Alexander. I think you're bringing forth some positivism around the opportunity that we can. I think you said, we can actually coordinate and work together. ERNs is a good example of that, and many of you have talked about the need here to address these access hurdles, that we need to bring together these different bodies that are somehow responsible and have an obligation to look at the data and to either authorize and to keep looking at data post authorization, and we become wiser and wiser by seeing how patients are actually responding and succeeding with this. And that could also be used downstream, further downstream, with payers and physicians and so forth. You say we can do that, Alexander, and we have examples that we can coordinate. We need to maybe leverage that as a stronghold. We've been together in this community for many decades now. Is it time to really make that work for us in an even greater way? That brings me to you, Cesar, because in the beginning you said something about how you also, as an agency, are trying to break down these silos and make these cross-body, let's say, collaborations work. Do you recognize the opportunity here to become, to be better at coordination, and what would it take? Could you mention some concrete actions that one could take that you might have experienced with yourself?
Well, thank you. I think that, as I mentioned before, you need to take the whole life cycle of this kind of medicines. So we try. I know it sounds very ambitious, but we established a so-called innovation office that would like to tackle the problem from the very beginning to the end. So we include in this vision of innovation, the advice to very immature projects coming from the academia, but also for the industry. But when I say very mature, it's more frequent that it comes from the academia. Trying to find the right place within the regulatory system so they can progress, and involving people from clinical trials and the people that is going to be later in the approval process. But they're also trying to integrate, for example, this with the early access programs, so pre-approval access to the medicines. So I will come to this later. I think it's very important to use this kind of data to also generate evidence. The problem that we have with the orphan medicines is the pace in which we can generate the evidence to convince everyone. But at the same time, we need to and I very agree with that idea. We need to provide patients with solutions that maybe we don't know if they are going to work in the end. But if they don't catch that train, probably they would miss an opportunity to improve. So we would like to connect this idea of the whole life cycle also with early access programs and with the possibility to obtain data for the companies and for the systems on these patients. And then also link with this to in Spain we have the so-called positioning reports. Is a kind of HTA reports, not so long as the EUNETA reports, but maybe in which we try to summarize all the evidence from the very beginning to the end. So we provide this input to the payers, so they can, not only the payers and the regional managers, so the ones who in the end are going to pay for those medicines, to provide with the relevant information in a kind of consensus of what is behind that medicine in terms of evidence. I think that it's important to have this, but it is important also to have the notion that this kind of products, especially the orphan medicinal products, we have a continuum. We used to live with different milestones, but in terms of evidence generation and in terms of even pay for a fair price for a product, we need to understand that from the very beginning, when we know nothing about the value of a product, and in the end, the final decision to have full access to the product, this way is a continuum, and it's not separated in different. And we try to give this sense of continuum so we can inform the patients, the healthcare professionals, the payers, the regions, the managers, whoever, with the right information at any stage of this. So, and we try to involve everyone in this pieces of information. So in the very early stages, everyone can agree that, this is promising, but we don't have enough evidence. And once we are, gathering this evidence, we try to give a consolidated opinion. This is what we are. Probably it's not enough to pay. I don't know. This idea of progression, I think, is important to be recognized, even in further developments of because to be honest, if we want to, if we want to give access to the patients as soon as possible, and I think this is something that we cannot fight against. Patients know more about the developments sometimes even that the agencies. They know where an academic group are developing a potential treatment that is going to relieve the disease or something like that, and we need to tackle with that and to provide information on how this promising product is confirming the final value. And in order to do this, I think, again, it is important that we also incorporate to the prices system this sense of progression. I mean, it is very difficult to fight or to face the challenge of, most price system. The best price you are going to have in your life is the first one, then it's going down. It doesn't matter if the knowledge increases. It doesn't matter if the value of the product proves to be more than in the beginning. I mean, this is what the industry can expect. And to be honest, the way we generate evidence, knowledge is the opposite. So in the end, we need to solve this dilemma. I mean, we pay a lot of money for very, very low evidence, and once we have evidence, we pay less money than in the beginning, and this is nonsense in the way we usually organize this. And I think this is my final comment in this round. I think we need to find the ways to make possible the repurposing of all products. I think that, I mean, in terms of access, it is non-fair for the patients to mix products that are already in the market and can benefit the patients, and that probably have been used off-label and have gathered the evidence for the approval with this off-label use. To mix these products with those products that are developed from the scratch, I think that in the end creates more tension in the system than helping the patients. So I think we need to find right ways, fair ways to recognize these indications, even to recognize the value and to have an adjusted price for those products, but not to mix with those that are coming for the first time and have been developed from the scratch. Because in the end,
Cesar, may I allow myself to bring in the others, because I'd really like to hear how their view is on what you're saying here. But thank you. And at this time, I'd like to thank here the second panel for bringing in, I think, very concrete solutions. But now I'd like you to stay, Alexander and Cesar and Michaela, and I'd like to bring back the panelists from the first panel, so Kaya and Manuela and Jan, because you've been listening in. And we have confirmed and heard a lot about, we have been proud and can be proud of what have been happening the past 20 years, the basis of market exclusivity and having really incentivized companies go into an area that was orphaned before and less so now. And at the same time, we're also seeing huge gaps, maybe not in that area, that has been working, but really seeing the access. And I keep coming back to notions that are here around data sharing across what many of you have called the life cycle, meaning from the very inception of a product, we start generating evidence and data around how it works, all the way to the usage of it and how patients respond and how it changes their lives and so forth. That life cycle of data gathering, that might be the backbone of sharing, and then some kind of common, I like the word one of you said, companionship around problem solving, because we're bringing new therapies in that might not respond well to the current practices of how we judge and value evidence and so forth. That is a common problem. I hear you say that's just a fact of when we're getting into these more difficult diseases, we might face this with new technologies. So if I may ask you here for the next 10 minutes to bring maybe very short, each of you, around this access part, around the data sharing, data generation that can be used then for risk sharing agreements, can be used for a multitude of things, and at the same time, a companionship around problem solving. So we think about the data as the infrastructure and the companionship around problem solving as the tool of how we work with understanding and making use of that data. What do you think are what would make a lot of difference to you that we start doing? It's Wednesday today, so let's give Kaya and others a couple of days to rest. What do we start doing on Monday then, each of us? And that's actually not just Kaya, that's all of you who are part in creating a better future. And if you can stick to the access and the data as infrastructure and the companionship as common problem solving tool, what do you think that we should do, and who should be doing new stuff on Monday? If you could have one or two reflections on that, who wants to begin?
I can start. Thank you very much, Christian, and I would like to thank the previous speakers. It was extremely interesting, to listen to the exchange and what you were saying. And it's not that we will start on Monday. I think we all have been working on that since a long time, and this will continue now. And I think this aspect of access to medicines, it's not an issue and a matter which is just in relation to orphans. It is in relation to all medicines, and this is for orphans, like the colleagues like Michaela mentioned, these are the specificities and difficulties, because we have a small group of patients, because we have a lot of advanced therapies which are for rare diseases. And indeed, this is something we look into now in the revision of the orphan regulation, but of course we all know that there are some things we can try to influence now in the orphan regulations. We look to different solutions also to improve access, and we have been discussing this with many stakeholders. And I take this opportunity as well to thank all of you, because I know that throughout the summer as well, everyone was very much involved in the input, very fruitful and good input to this study and to this revision. But we also look into these aspects under this general, pharmaceutical strategy, which is, like you all say, looking into the life cycle of the product. Because it has already been said that from the beginning, from the early development stages, when we discuss the evidence which is needed, help needs to be given to those products in the areas where there are no treatment options, in these very promising products, curative products. So the more help is given there, in the evidence generation, which would be needed, like Cesar said, throughout then the development and throughout this regulatory path of this product, this could only help. And we have member states, we have national policies, we have companies with their decisions as well on launching the products. We are looking at all of this through the life cycle of the product to improve this access to innovation. And yesterday we have launched actually an open public consultation on all of this in the framework of the general pharmaceutical legislation revision. So I invite you all as well to join this process. And I know that many of you have already joined. We had discussions with member states, with payers, with industry. We started already before the summer, and I think these discussions need to continue, because like you say, we all need to discuss and try to find common solutions that would help patients
Thank you.
Access to those products. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaya. And maybe and you have a process set up, and thanks for bringing the attention to this news consultation as well. Now, the rest of you, Kaya is definitely asking for input to this in consultations, but also here now. Anyone else want to give her a hand and saying, let's just imagine, I know it's just for the fun of it's just for argument's sake, let's think on Monday we could be doing something different. What would that be? And if you could be brief, stating one or two things, I'd like to hear from all of you before we end in 9 minutes.
So maybe I can give it a try. On the one hand, when it comes to data, and Alexander mentioned that earlier, really empowering the European reference networks in their work when it comes to data collection, because it will help us with accelerating diagnosis. It will help us with setting standards. Also in ensuring that the quality of data is consistent and there's interoperability, across the European Union, because with the small populations, as we said earlier, I think that is something where we have to work together, and the ERNs can be, I believe, that authority that can help with that, for example. On the point around access, I think they're, making sure that we don't hold OMPs to the same evidence standards as we hold on non-OMPs to, right? Really having much more flexibility. Michaela mentioned that earlier as well. around these topics because of the uncertainty that exists, because of the high burden that we see in the heterogeneous populations there. So I think that is another thing to work on and to have more flexibility around. And then, you know, Cesar mentioned that earlier.
The final thing, Manuela.
Yeah, the final thing for me would be around developing a consensus on HTA approaches for orphan medicines, because I really do think that we are applying the same approach to orphans, and it just doesn't work when it comes to value recognition. So those would be the concrete 3 things that I would propose.
That's very concrete. Jan, what are patients yearning for?
I fully support what Kaya and Manuela first said. Was very interested by what Cesar said also before. I think very concretely, there is the proposals that we've put forward with the working group of experts, with EUCOPE and the different stakeholders participating. So I think there is concrete proposals there. We need to look at incentives beyond what is in the regulation. Now, to be very concrete, I'd like to push some of the lines here. And one is for instance, to make the compulsory in the regulation, the scientific advice and protocol assistance. For being in the comp for 9 years and following the work since 20 years, I think it's nonsense not to have it compulsory, because there is less chances to succeed. 2, why not considering to modulate incentives, or maybe like adding 1 year of market exclusivity, for instance, or 2 years, when the companies commit to an early dialogue with EMA and HTA and payers, obviously with clinicians and patients, and to discuss there the natural history, to discuss the clinical and the surrogate endpoints, to discuss the patient-reported outcome and the registries, and get these prompts and registries qualified by EMA, and maybe HTA could do the same. So this is the way to address the evidence generation, to reduce the uncertainties. And that would create, I think, a positive environment. We could also have an accelerated approval for transformative and potentially curative treatments, like the PRIME in the context of orphan regulation. That would make sense. And my last would be to address, to the point of Kaya, on the specificity of rare diseases. We are calling for a collaboration between payers for those rare therapies, and particularly the advanced therapies, to collaborate together to provide access. That's the only way to really discuss between responsible actors. And today we can use the contracts that the companies are signing with the hospitals that they select to deliver the gene therapy, and also where the data are being collected after marketing authorization. We have all the instruments here with the European Funds Network, with that type of contracts, these contracts being part of CHMP review, the registries and the prompts being qualified, and parts of EMA HTA collaboration. We have all the instruments to change the system if we decide to do so.
Thank you, Jan. Please, how do we make these next first concrete steps? In addition, we've heard some very concrete things. I applaud you for that. Who wants to give another go at this? Is that you, Michaela?
Can I start? Yes, I would like just to build on the top of what Jan were saying, that is, of course, and also Manuela were saying, all elements that are very relevant and very important. I would like to again stress the point that Cesar were saying before. We need to break down the silos thinking, not only the national level, but at the European level. Here we have we are Europe, and we need to think collectively at the European level to remove these. And so I think that we could really put in place a multi-stakeholder working group that could select a pilot project to pressure test all the different solutions that has been mentioned, but also I think that we need to think in this pilot all the elements related to the drug and related to the patient journey. So we need to work starting from the classification, proper classification, definition of the disease, early compulsory and parallel scientific advice and HTA assessment, as Jan was alluding and suggesting, up to the market access. We need also to think about potentially some European funds, and for sure to make access and also to support the real world evidence generation and collection, but also then we need to make working the cross-border healthcare rules that at the moment are not delivering what they have promised.
I think that was very concrete, Michaela, on around pilot projects, really to pressure test some of these new opportunities to collaborate and share data, leveraging the existing infrastructure that we have. This is starting to come together to something extremely interesting. I'll let you end, Cesar, with a final note, but before that, Alexander, how do you, from your position and what you hear from a broad range of companies, how do you see some successful, very concrete next steps?
Thanks, Christian. I mean, my call for action for Monday would actually be along the lines with what we heard, what we have heard quite a bit. It's about coordination and collaboration, starting really to exchange experiences about very important elements here. And one thing is definitely post-launch evidence generation, real-world evidence, whatever you want to call it. There are many practices at the member state level, which I think are good practices. And why don't we start exchanging about that? Having a collaboration. This is not a harmonization. This is not meaning that we put something necessarily in legislation. The ERNs have shown that collaboration works quite positively. Yeah. Another point, apart from the real-world evidence on that coordination table, would also be, and I know this is not OMP specific, but I think it's so critical that I want to mention it again, and also Manuela has mentioned it, the methodology for that clinical assessment for an HTA. It will be a major step forward, but it could also be a big risk if we don't make sure that we take into account the particularities of orphan medicines. To be concrete, if the outcome of that assessment, that clinical assessment, would in many cases be there is no value, there's no, the value judgment ultimately is at the member state level, but there are hints in that clinical assessment to say, well, it's better than what we're having, or it's not better than what we're having. If the latter is in the majority of the cases of OMPs existing that there is no value attributed to those therapies, we will have a major issue with access. And I think it's such a critical point that I want to mention it here. We need to talk about this. We need to talk about the methodology. How is the methodology right that we get those products through the joint HTA, which is good to have it, but we need to make the methodology right. And last but not least, another point, which is also in our somewhat—
Final one, Alexander.
Final one. Which is in the OD expert group, which has been discussed there. Significant benefit needs also to be discussed at the national level, because we brand market product with a significant benefit at the EU level in giving it an ODD, but at the national level, the payers are saying, well, it's not better than what we're having, and they give it a very poor price, and that's an issue for access as well. So we need to align better on the significant benefit to link it into the member state decision-making processes. Thank you.
Very operational again, and I'll let you have a final go, Cesar, but do leave 1 minute for me to round off.
Just to comment on the experience on COVID-19, I think that for ultra-rare diseases, for those that are really difficult to find a way to develop without taking a big risk, I think that's something similar what has been done with vaccines. So funding in advance the development in order to get some, maybe it is a solution. I think joint procurement is also a different perspective. I think that for joint procurement, it is important that, and this is maybe a little bit provocative, just to share the money among part from Europe, part for the national perspective, but also from the users. That I'm not saying the patient, but the regions that have the budgets in the countries and pay for the money for the drug. Maybe then everyone takes the appropriate risk on pay, and we have the right incentives. But definitely for ultra-rare disease, I will try this vaccines-like approach.
Thank you so much. That leaves us very close to the end. You have been marvelously dedicated, the panelists. If it was a live audience, I would ask everyone to applaud, and you would have gotten huge applause. And I'm sure people are doing that out on their screens. I think this was a tour de force of the OMP, ending with very concrete things that kept circulating around our opportunity in Europe to really make a difference. We're making a regulation that impacts our friends and families that are not even born today. this is a huge responsibility, and I think it centers around, we know what has worked, but we also know that access is underlying. We keep talking about data that we need to share. Today, data is much more in abundance, and we have technologies that we did 20 years ago, and we're able to use that to facilitate a whole new way of thinking about our collaboration in this union, that we are companions in common problem solving. And I've heard some very concrete things that we could do, pilot projects using what we already know works in ERNs and so forth. Those are concrete steps. Thank you for joining this session, all of you out there. I hope that your questions that you had sent was somehow, I tried to make sure that they were somehow responded to and answered, even though they were not posed directly. So I hope that you feel that your questions that you sent have been answered during this session. And to discuss what you heard with fellow Gastein attendees, facilitate, head over to the Reflection Roundtable Lounge that is in the chat as well. Thank you so much and have a wonderful Wednesday.